At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. So I almost called this episode, "You're the Villain in This Story," because of the absolute horrific story that my guest shared with me today. And holy cow, you're going to want to listen to this entire episode. Sometimes as school leaders, we're forced to make really difficult decisions, like whether to non-renew an employee. I mean, that can be really difficult. Whether to close a teaching section, and that's going to increase class sizes. Man, that's an agonizing decision. And my guest this week, he made a gut-wrenching decision to cancel his school district's football season. And he did it for all the right reasons. And he also considered the short-term, the long-term, the unintended consequences of the decision and does a marvelous job of talking about it. Dr. Richard Labbe is my guest, and in part one, he discusses the importance of coaching for new teachers through a partnership with EdConnective, which is a coaching partnership program. And then he starts to touch on the decision to cancel the football season. And as he starts part two, he is totally willing to keep going. And so he talks about the many moving parts with the decision to cancel the season. He talks about the media and having to communicate this through all the different constituencies. And it really is an incredible resource for the field. So I'm grateful to Dr. Labbe for his willingness to revisit what no doubt has been and was a very difficult career decision. I'm Peter Stiepelman, and this is An Imperfect Leader. Today on Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Richard Labbe, the superintendent of the Sayreville Schools in Sayreville, New Jersey. Now, Dr. Labbe took a different path to education. He started out at a small automobile public relations company, then met a class of children as a substitute teacher, and he knew he had to be in a classroom. Dr. Labbe also was a football and wrestling coach, and while he was subbing, he had this opportunity to sub for elementary school teachers, and in his words, simply fell in love with the profession. Now, I also didn't start out as an educator. I started out as an insurance agent and went into a third grade class to read one day, and it changed my life. And so, Dr. Labbe, I'm so proud to meet you. I know you've been a teacher, a principal, a director of special services, and a superintendent. So welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Oh, thank you. The pleasure is all mine, and I'm humbled that you'd asked me to be on your podcast.
Oh, I'm thrilled that you're here. And it's really so nice to meet you because, I've read a few issues of Talk Soup, your regular communication with the Sayreville community. And I think I spotted somewhere in there that you thought about becoming a sportscaster at one point. My favorites are the Gary Cohen, Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling, that trio during Mets games, which is, it's fun to listen to them while watching the Mets lose perpetually. So that's no fun. But I imagine that good sportscasters, that they have to be analytical, they have to be good communicators. These are two essential skills also for superintendents. And so it was in this analysis of the need of supporting your new teachers beyond that first year that you and I became connected. And so I wonder, would you talk about how you came to realize that teachers in years 2 through 4 really needed support? And then if you'll just expand on that a little bit, like talk about what you did and what gains you've seen.
Well, knowing that the teacher is by far the most important factor in learning, we think that all of our teachers need as much support as we can possibly give them. However, you're right. It is our teachers in years 1 through 4 with us that we tend to devote the most attention to. We provide coaching to them. Our first year teachers, we provide in-person coaching. We have a coach that goes out and works with them in person to get them through that very challenging first year. However, even in my own experience, I felt my second year teaching was more difficult than my first year teaching. I thought going into my second year that, I got all this. I know what's going to happen, not realizing that every new school year is a new adventure with twists and turns that you aren't prepared for. So we began to look for how can we provide our second through fourth year teachers with the same type of coaching, but not having to hire 3 or 4 new coaches. So we found EdConnective, which is a great service for our teachers, our second year teachers, third year teachers, and fourth year teachers that participated in EdConnective coaching this year found it incredibly rewarding and beneficial to them. They found it to be a very self-directed journey for them, to which they would actually provide feedback to their coach, feedback that they'd received from their supervisors, their principal, and they would work together to develop whatever practice that they felt needed to be improved. Or, and we did have some cases where there were parts of their practice that they felt were strong, but they wanted to make them stronger. So every single one of our teachers that participated in EdConnective coaching, as well as our in-person coaching, really found the whole process to be greatly rewarding and are in fact looking forward to it next year. In fact, we have some fourth year teachers that are not going to receive coaching next year, and they've already expressed their disappointment with me. But, we tried to tell them that, we do provide coaching throughout the district, content-oriented coaching for our teachers, and they'll be able to participate in that.
That's really interesting because you're not sort of saying, okay, we're just going to pass this off to somebody else. You're saying, how do we find a way to complement that sort of in-person, real-time coaching that our own staff can do, but also create that safe place, knowing that a teacher may be more willing to be vulnerable with an individual who's not in their building, that they can work out through, work some issues or work some feedback that they've received from their supervisor in a sort of a controlled space, in a time dedicated space for them, and then be able to do that and then get that real-time feedback from the person within their building.
Yeah, it's much similar to, I've heard teachers talk about, some teachers have had the luxury of having a personal trainer with them with regard to fitness. And a lot of them make the same analogy that it's less intimidating when they're working with their personal coach. They find that support much more beneficial. Whether, again, it's that in-person coach that we provide in year 1 or the virtual coach that we provide in years 2 through 4.
No one would question, I'm going to go to your sportscaster history or in this idea that no one would question an athlete's desire to have a personal coach or that one-on-one focus and support so that they can be at the top of their game. And so why wouldn't we do the same thing for teachers?
Absolutely. You look at all the other industries that have coaches. If you're a fan of the music industry, John Bon Jovi is a hero in Sayreville. He grew up in Sayreville.
I was going to say, you have to, if you're not going to say Springsteen, it's got to be Bon Jovi, right?
Yeah, so he grew up in Sayreville, graduated from Sayreville War Memorial High School, but he, like Springsteen, like Billy Joe recently, they have vocal coaches to help them, again, perfect what it is that they need to perfect, whether it's enhance the strength in their vocal performance or improve what they consider to be a work on or a weakness. So why wouldn't teachers also have coaches?
So I wrote a book called An Imperfect Leader, and in the book and in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's this dimension called nested patterns. And that's really like the muscle of an organization's work. And inside that dimension, there's a term or terms, empathy and compassion. And so as I was preparing for our conversation today, I read this about you. The job has not been without challenges. During his first year, evidence of hazing by the Sayreville High School football team gained national attention, and the superintendent canceled the season. It's not an easy decision since, at the time, the team had won state championships in 3 of the previous 4 years. Wow. So I read a great deal about this gut-wrenching decision. I read about the meeting you had with parents and students, and you empathized with their past achievements and as well as their current goals. And you showed compassion even when you had to tell them of your decision. How important was it for you to leverage empathy and compassion in that moment in what I think was your first year as superintendent? Is that right?
First of all, it was extremely important. But no, it was actually my 4th year as a superintendent.
Okay.
Prior to coming to Sayreville, I served as a superintendent for 3 years in a small town called Greenbrook.
Gotcha. So first year in Sayreville, though. So,
first year in Sayreville.
Hey, community, I'm so glad to be here. By the way, I've made a very big decision. And so I was just wondering, wow, how did that also define, just the kind of leader that you were, every day after that?
It was literally the third month on the job, but I did have the fortunate experience of working in Sayreville previously. You mentioned earlier that I had an opportunity to coach and substitute teach. Well, that was actually in Sayreville. So I worked for 4 years in Sayreville as a substitute teacher, coach. I did my student teaching in Sayreville. So I knew the community pretty well, and I knew it was a very football culture oriented community too. So I knew too well how difficult that decision was going to have to be. But you're right, I did have to demonstrate empathy and compassion in making that decision, first and foremost to the victims in this particular matter, which there were. And it was important that myself and the Board of Education, first and foremost, expressed, our thoughts and feelings toward the victims, making sure that the community realized that there were victims in this matter. The actual kids, their families, but also the people that were collateral damage to my decision, such as the cheerleaders, the band members, that had nothing to do with what actually happened, but they were victims too, because they, in a sense, lost part of their seasons too. So we had to demonstrate a great deal of compassion toward those groups as well. But being a former football player, former football coach, particularly in Sayreville, I knew that the message that we were going to be sending to the community in terms of we weren't going to accept any form of harassment, intimidation, bullying, hazing at all. And we all know that actions speak far greater than words. And based upon the capacity of what occurred, which obviously I can't get into, we needed to make a strong statement, both through words and through our actions, but to also do it with compassion, empathy, and a great deal of discretion. So I wanted to make sure that I communicated that message accurately. And one of the things I pride myself on is being a communicator, whether it's written expression or expressing myself verbally to a group of people. So when the board and I decided to make the painful and very difficult decision to cancel the season, I said that I wanted to be the one, first and foremost, to let our students know. And I did. I gathered our student athletes, and it was not a very easy thing to do with 60 young men, letting them know that after the third game of the season, their season was over, particularly for those kids that had an opportunity to potentially get scholarships to play football in college. But I wanted to make sure that they understood why we were making this decision and that we love them. We understood that mistakes were made, but they're children, and children do make mistakes. However, they needed to know that this was a mistake that they couldn't make again. And that's why we needed to act with the magnitude that we did. Then I wanted to make sure that I reported that same information to the parents, who I commonly refer to as our clients. Our kids are our customers, our parents are our clients. And I wanted to make sure that the same message got through to them, because if you work in education long enough, you know that when you talk to a student and the student goes home and tells mom and dad what you said, that message is going to be distorted. It just happens. Good or bad, it's going to get distorted. So I wanted to make sure that the moms and dads understood the same message. And I did have a meeting with them. Interestingly, the meeting with the students went far better than the meeting with the parents. It was not a very pleasant meeting. I was video recorded. Those videos were leaked to the press. Thankfully, again, I pride myself on being a good communicator, and nothing was harmful in terms of the videos that were released. In fact, if anything, it went ahead and further reinforced how much compassion that we had for both the victims of this case, including those collateral damage victims, and the perpetrating students.
What did you learn about yourself as a leader?
I've always felt that I've had a philosophy for making tough decisions. And, I've always been a leader that I never want to say the word no. We never want to say no. We hate the word no. But we know that as a leader, you're going to have to say no many, many times, and people aren't going to be happy with that. And then you're going to make decisions that people just, don't agree with, and can be quite emotional about not agreeing with them. So I've developed this philosophy that when I make any decision, I have to think of students first and foremost, and then I think of staff, and then I think of parents and anyone else. And this just reinforced that philosophy that I had, that this was a very difficult decision, but was the best decision for all the students involved, victims and students that were engaged in activities that they shouldn't have been in.
Sounds like you had your conversation with students first. Was that was also intentional in terms of this hierarchy of decision making? I'm going to start with students first. They need to hear from me before I talk to their parents.
Yes.
Yeah. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Well, being someone that's very spiritual, we're all imperfect people. I try to impress this upon the young people that I talk with and meet with, and even our staff members when they make mistakes, that I make far more mistakes than anyone. We're imperfect people. We're going to make mistakes. However, it's important that we stay away from making large mistakes, that we exercise critical thinking, great judgment before making major decisions that could impact our lives or our organizations to a great extent.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest is Dr. Richard Labbe, and he is the superintendent of the Sayreville Schools in Sayreville, New Jersey. Now, in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they've made, and then we discuss it. And so I'm going to ask what happened. I'm going to let everybody know what we're going to do is we're going to continue to mine the experience that we talked about in segment 1 in terms of the first year as a superintendent in Sayreville, not the first year as a superintendent, but having to say that there was evidence of hazing in the high school football team. It gained national attention, and you had to cancel the season, and that must have been a gut-wrenching and agonizing decision. So I wonder, as much as you can say with protecting everyone's names and things like that, what happened?
Well, in this particular matter, we had members of the football team engaging in activities that would clearly be considered now to be hazing. And those activities were of a very serious nature, to which several of the perpetrators were in fact found guilty of a child crime for assault. It was a situation in which we had a number of students involved. It had become somewhat of a ritual that had been accepted and tolerated. So based upon that pattern, we knew that we had to take a strong stance against it. Also, this was a matter that was being investigated by the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. So the places in which these crimes were committed were considered crime scenes. Our coaches at the time were being investigated to determine if they had any knowledge of what was going on, and thankfully none of them did. So we understood that at least for the several weeks, there might be the possibility that we wouldn't be able to use our facilities, that our coaches wouldn't be available, and that many of our players were being investigated for what had occurred, and the fact that this was generally being allowed to take place by the players. So we considered that, obviously an accepted form of hazing and so forth. So we made the difficult decision to go ahead and cancel the season.
So you have somewhat of what had been considered historically a rite of passage that clearly violated your policies and would And the fact that the prosecuting attorney was already investigating, you've got sort of two concurrent investigations going on, one within the school district that you have a responsibility for, and then certainly it raised the level of the prosecutors looking into this as well. That is unbelievable. You talked a little bit earlier about the fact that you attended first to the victims, which I think is super important because those who listen to the podcast each week, many are in their early years as superintendent and really see this as a podcast to sort of help them think through experiences that they may find themselves dealing with or are dealing with, and then finding real value in hearing how other leaders have handled this. So the fact that you were really intentional about not thinking first about the football team and the canceled season, but more about what happened to children who were the victims. And then I hadn't even thought about, so I really appreciate that sort of that connection to, well, who is also connected to the football team. I think you referred to it as collateral damage, the marching band, the cheerleaders, the boosters, the community members that come out on a Friday night or Saturday morning, depending on when you have your football games, that rely on the community that is formed through sport. And so all of those kinds of things. As you look back on this experience, what might have been something that got overlooked?
Well, I mean, in terms of overlooked, I mean, there were some things that I did then that as an experienced superintendent, I probably wouldn't do now. First, when, we went ahead and canceled the game because of the initial charges that were being filed against our students. And then we were debating whether to go ahead and cancel the season. We were faced with an immediate crush of local media. Unbelievably so, Sayreville canceling a football game reached New York City and Pennsylvania and Delaware. So we had news media from New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, bombarding our schools. It was the Thursday prior to the Friday game. It got so intense at the beginning of the school day that parents were calling me upset that people from the media were harassing their kids. They're not letting their kids get into school, that they were blocking streets and this and that. So I had talked to some of my people in my cabinet about what can we do to pull the media away from our schools, especially during dismissal. If it was that bad in the morning, what can we do to pull the media away so we can get our kids out? So I came up with the idea of holding a press conference to go ahead and formally announce that we have canceled the game and to explain why and what had gone on and so forth. And, it worked in the sense of it brought all the media, which was close to 100 different reporters, into this small little media room that we had away from our schools, and we kept them away for an hour so our kids could be dismissed. But what I didn't anticipate was the amount of media wave that we would experience after that. By me doing that, I just opened Pandora's box to greater media a greater media surge. And then, to make matters worse, when that media surge began, it then became a national story. And I was approached by the Today Show to do what is called a loop broadcast that would loop into each major network's broadcasting system if I would do an interview with my board president. And we had talked about it with our attorney, and we thought, you know what, Sayreville is getting a bad name. We can use this as a platform to try to get out the good name of Sayreville, so that as people are talking about what had occurred with the football team, we would be talking about what a great place Sayreville is, so that the reputation of the town doesn't get completely smeared. Again, it was good thinking, but if I was more experienced, I would not have done that either, because then the story became definitely a national story and even an international story, to the point in which I couldn't do my job anymore. I was just crushed with emails. I would get about 1,500 to 2,000 emails a day from people all across the country, never mind media sources. So we had to actually go ahead and hire a crisis firm, Abernathy and McGregor out of New York City, to take over that part of the situation, because I just couldn't do my job anymore. So in retrospect, probably wouldn't have done the press conference, and then certainly probably wouldn't have done the Today Show.
I'm interested in that because when one establishes sort of an incident command, if there's a natural disaster or something like that, right? You have a press conference or you have a regularly scheduled, we're going to give the media information about what's going on so that you can focus on your work, or the people who are in the hierarchy that are responsible for the care of children can do their job. So, I'm kind of interested in that, because it seemed like that made a lot of sense to sort of pull the attention over to, I'm going to give you information so that children can get out of school safely. And then I am sort of interested in your perspective on the Today Show, and thinking about what you learned there, because maybe looking back, it's the unintended consequence of, do I really care what all these other people think of Sayreville? I know our community knows what a great district we are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I guess the initial purpose of each was, you could probably say, was achieved, but I didn't understand the secondary and tertiary response to what I was doing. First of all, I didn't understand the media. I didn't understand the nature of the media, even though the media was something that I wanted to do early on in my career. As you mentioned, I idolized Bob Costas. I wanted to be in the media. I wanted to be in broadcast journalism and or print journalism, but I didn't understand the nature of the beast. I didn't understand that these people aren't your friends, that these people want stories, and they'll do anything to get a story. And when I tell you that people would threaten me with rumors and innuendos about my personal life, about my previous, jobs that I've held, and they just purely make up stories and lies just to get me on the phone, just to get me on camera and then talk about the story, and had no problem telling me, I lied about that just to get you on camera. I lied about that just to get you on the phone. And that was difficult to deal with. So I had this feeling of, I didn't have any trust for anyone now in the media. So everybody in the media, I felt, was trying to take a piece of me, and they just wanted my quote. And one person told me, Dr. Labbe, you don't get it. The modern media now, we work on number of people that view our stories. So on our website, we get paid for the amount of time our story stays number one on our website, and it stays number one by the amount of people that view our story. So
the more salacious, the better. Yeah.
That's basically what it told me. And then there was the group in Sayreville that was angry with me for canceling the season, mostly the parents of the football players and so forth. So they started trying to create stories about me in my past, and fabricate different things about me, and would mention things to some reporters, and these reporters would then contact me. Oh, I want to follow up about this. This one said you did this. That one said you did this. And pretty soon it became, I was the villain. I quickly became the villain. I wasn't prepared for that either. I've always been someone, as I said earlier, that everything I do is for kids. You don't become an educator unless you love kids and you want nothing but the best outcomes for them. And suddenly I turned into a villain. And I'll never forget, after I did the Today Show, it got worse, because it became almost like a smear, contest against me. So this one reporter for CNBC tried to write a story that I turned a blind eye to racism and so forth. And the representatives from Abernathy and McGregor had to actually go set up a meeting with myself, the editor at the time at CNBC, and this writer, to get him to not write the story, or we would file slander and libel charges against him, because there was no factual basis to it at all. And we had many people to oppose everything that this reporter was trying to say. And he actually says to me in the elevator going down, we were coming downstairs. We had to go to New York City for this meeting. So we're in NBC offices, and he's taking the elevator down with us. And he says, Dr. Labbe, you don't get this. And I'm like, okay, what is it that I don't get? And he goes, every story needs a villain, and you're the villain of the story. And that just has resonated.
This was after the meeting? Like, okay, we agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, hey, no hard feelings. Just want to make sure the reason why I was doing this is we need a villain, and you fit the role.
So he did write a story. He did write, certain things, but he didn't write anything about me being racist or turning a blind eye to racism. because we would have filed slander and libel charges against him if he had done that, because he had no factual basis on any of that.
Clearly, the question of what frustrated you is very clear. What did you learn about relationships, or maybe what new relationships were formed as a result of this?
Well, clearly you learn who the people are that you can trust and count on when you're, pardon the expression, I hate to use a wartime expression, but when you're in a foxhole with somebody, you really learn quickly who the people are that you can count on. And here I am again. I wasn't in this district for more than 3 months, and there were people in that district, including our board attorney and several other people in my cabinet, that really just hunkered down with me. And I will say this: I was blessed too to have a board of education that supported me in every step of the way. Even though that there were people trying to assassinate my character, and they didn't know who I was at the time, they didn't know me as a person. And you had these people trying to assassinate my character, and they stuck by me. And that meant the world to me. So, when times are tough, there are two types of people. There are the people that are going to sit there with you and be there for you and support you. And they're going to be people that get as far away from you as possible. So that's one of the things that I learned, especially in this, industry, that, when things go sideways in education, they can really go sideways. And you really know who you can count on when things go sideways, and those people get closer to you when it does. I formed incredible relationships with those people. They are some of the closest and best friends of my life, including our board attorney. And I'll forever be grateful for the support that they gave me during a time when I needed it most.
It must be so hard to trust people after that experience. When you think about relationships are built on trust, and so many people violated that trust. And I wonder, as superintendents listen to this podcast and consider, sometimes they're non-renewing a teacher, and that will blow up in their face, right? Or they're going to discontinue a program, and that blows up in their face based on people they believe that they can trust, and then it just turns sideways, as you indicated earlier, right? When it goes sideways very quickly. What advice do you have for those leaders who are, they just have a hard time trusting? Because it sounds like you really went through the ringer on this.
Well, my advice to them is this: A, you're going to have to trust. You are certainly going to have to trust people, because you can't do this job yourself. I'm someone that has learned that the hard way. I've tried to do too much by myself, and you just can't do it. If you do it, you're going to get yourself burned out, or worse, you're going to do those things not as well as you could have done them. So you're going to have to trust. But I would say take the time to really get to know people. Take the time to not only get to know them as a professional, but as a person, and make decisions based upon who those people are as people, as persons, more than professionals, because it's the person in the end that is going to stand by you, not the professional.
So in the end, what was something that was good that came out of this experience?
Just a great deal of learning and growth. I never thought that I would grow as much as I grew during that whole experience. And I would never wish what I went through upon anyone. My family can tell you it was a very difficult time for us. But the amount that I grew because of it was more than I ever imagined. Having gone through this, it's made me a far better leader, because I've become a much better communicator, a much better decision maker, and I think a better person.
My guest today was Dr. Richard Labbe, the superintendent of the Sayreville Schools in Sayreville, New Jersey. And Richard, I just am so thankful for you, for your willingness to practice what Brené Brown urges every leader to do, which is to lead with vulnerability, to be that lead learner, to revisit a really probably just heartbreaking experience that is hard to sort of revisit and to talk about. But I think more than anything, our leaders who are listening today have learned so much from you. Thank you for talking a little bit about how you support new teachers through EdConnective and that work, because it is about how do you continue to not just recruit great people, but to retain them. And as you just noted, you hire the people. And if you can support your people, they'll do anything for you. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. It was an honor and a pleasure, Peter.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader. I'm Peter Stiepelman. Please join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. Empath Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with Empath Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. Empath Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.